This is the Haulin Assets podcast, where we show you how to start and run your own trucking company. Ever wanted to go out on your own? Follow Chris as he goes through the highs and lows of running on his own authority.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Haulin Assets podcast, episode number 170. Today is all about trucking safety culture. I am Craig. Over there, he is Chris. How's it going, Chris?
It's going well. How you doing?
I'm all right. Good. Although, I have to say, when I got your email, said, here's what we're going to be talking about on this episode, I had a little bit of a traumatic flashback, Chris. Maybe I can share that with you.
You should.
In a few moments. I'll just remind everybody first to go to haulinassetsllc.com for full show notes. Go to motorcarrierhq.com for tools, tips, and people to help you make the leap from employee driver to owner-operator. And lastly, haulinassetsacademy.com, where you can do some self-driven learning around issues that are going to be vital if you do take that leap. Did I forget anything, Chris?
I think that's it.
Okay. All right. So, Chris, we're talking trucking safety. And, I've never been behind the wheel of a big rig, at least not since I was about 12 and working on my grandpa's farm up in Idaho. And that doesn't exactly count. I think that thing must have been built in the mid 70s. Yeah. Anyway, so I can't speak to that side of it. However, I can instantly and vividly recall a wreck that I saw on Highway 6 here in Utah. And anybody who's driven through Utah knows Highway 6. It goes right through the Wasatch Mountains, kind of right through central Utah. And it's a notorious undivided freeway that's going, or I should say highway, that's going at full freeway speeds.
If you remember if you've listened from the very beginning of the podcast, you know this is also the road that I drove my first load on. That I'd ever driven. It's the first time I ever had driven a semi with an actual load on it.
Really?
On Highway 6.
That's trial by fire.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's notorious for the amount of wrecks that happen on it, and this was about 15 years ago. I witnessed a fatality on that road, a triple fatality, actually. A car full of 4 middle-aged adults, 3 of whom did not survive the head-on collision when the driver of that car drifted into the lane of the oncoming semi-truck. Really brutal, not a fun memory. I don't bring this up as a lighthearted thing. It's been 15 years, so it's a little bit easier to talk about now. But at the time, I was going to a wedding. Let me tell you, I was not all smiles.
Ruined the wedding
at this cousin's wedding. Wow. So, that was really, really tough. And so anyway, I thought of that when you sent me the email and thought, gosh, truck safety goes two ways, doesn't it?
It does go two ways. And, although this is a situation where wasn't the truck driver's fault, it does highlight well the consequences of not, taking a safety program seriously. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today is, safety programs and really why they matter. Why should we do them? Kind of as I mentioned, recently, Brad, our operations manager, went on to another opportunity, the end of last year, and Nate and I have kind of divvied out responsibilities. And some of the responsibilities that I'm taking on are compliance in our safety program. And so this has been a subject that has really been on my mind lately. And I feel like as a company, for the most part, we do a pretty good job with this, although it is something that we can improve on. And so that's kind of one of my goals for, the year going forward is to kind of improve our safety culture and our safety program even a little bit more and hopefully continue to do a little bit better job. We have had in 2024 some minor accidents, a few more than I would have liked. And, so again, it's another one of those things that's on my mind. That, okay, how can we do better? How can we avoid these things? And how can we prevent these things? And we'll probably kind of revisit this or similar topics as the year goes on.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's get into kind of the why of it. There's the why, there's the how when it comes to safety culture. And how do I put this? When you talk about the why behind safety culture, there's there's the no duh response, right? Like, hey, let's not die out there and let's not kill anybody else out there. That would be the obvious no duh response. But I'm sure that there's more to it than that. Although I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's fair. We should have that no duh response, right? But why? Do you want to talk about that first?
We should, and that's really, probably first and foremost is as trucking company owners, as truck drivers, we have a moral obligation to the general public to keep roads safe. And for the most part, we do. Accidents that involve commercial motor vehicles, 80% of the time are caused by a non-commercial motor vehicle driver. And so we do a good job. We're not the ones that are always causing, big catastrophic accidents like the one you witnessed. But we do still cause some of them. And, what can we do to kind of avoid and prevent that? And those are a few things that we're going to talk about today. And it's not the most sexy topic in the world, but it is an important topic because, not only do we all want to be safe for our company's sake, our driver's sake, and for the general public's sake, but it's also, financially, it can have, ignoring safety can have catastrophic consequences for a company.
Yeah. Well, you talked about the moral obligation. There's also the financial side of it, and how this can affect a company, right? I'll give you another story. This one is a little more lighthearted. So, one of the many hats that I wear professionally is as a spokesman. So every once in a while, I get hired on as a spokesman to do ads and commercials and that sort of thing. And one that I got hired on to do last year was, I won't mention the name of it, but it was a kind of a legal conglomerate of a bunch of different lawyers that they were ambulance chasers. And they wanted me to write and read these ads for them. And one of them that they really, really wanted to hit was, if you get in an accident that's not your fault, and it's with a commercial, like a delivery vehicle or a truck or something, then, of course, they're taking a very somber tone. But the reading between the lines is, celebrate, man. You got hit by a commercial vehicle. You're going to sue the crap out of them. And they're going to have a lot deeper pockets than the guy that hit you in the Hyundai, doing 25 on your residential, right? And so that kind of just a little glimpse into how people are, could be, if they're litigious enough, licking their chops at the idea of you not being safe on the road.
Absolutely. And that's one of my biggest pet peeves is, like, none of us should, profit from, accidents like that. And you're not necessarily profiting from it when, you need to be made whole, right? But some of these take it above and beyond. And that's actually one of the things that I think in a future, episode not too far down the road, I plan on talking about, kind of, if you are involved in an accident, what should you do that you can limit your exposure there, like, whether it's your fault or not. We've had some experiences over the last year that have kind of opened my eyes to how you need to be extra careful when you're involved in an accident. And we'll talk a little bit about that, because you don't want those guys taking advantage of you either.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the why, and I think that's a question that we'll come back to, because we've got the moral obligation, we've got the financial obligation. You want to keep your company afloat, but there are going to be lots of little whys that we'll talk about. But Chris, can we move on to the how, and how you build a culture of safety? I'll mention you specifically with a truck, or an 11 truck fleet, I should say, but we can kind of talk about how you can think about that as a one-man band, or if you've got 100 trucks or 1,000 trucks, right? How this culture gets built.
Yeah, absolutely. And building a good safety culture within a company, it starts at the top. So, if you're a owner operator, obviously you're the person at the top, but there's things that you need to do and things you can do to prioritize safety. And when you are a owner that also has other drivers driving for them, you need to make sure that you vocalize that safety priority and that your actions back that up. You don't want to just talk the talk. You need to also walk the walk. And I think one of the ways that you can do that is show that you're putting safety above some of the other interests in your company. So for example, right now, as we're recording this, we're kind of in the middle of winter. And the winter season's a perfect example of when you can show that you put safety first. So a couple of things that I think we do really well as a company to put safety first, especially when it comes to weather driving, is, anytime a driver takes a route, they look at the route, they look at their planning, and then we also kind of look at that as well. And we look at the weather, what's happening. And Utah, we haul a lot of stuff to the southeast. And so, the most common route if you're leaving Utah to go to the southeast is you go up I-80 in Wyoming through Wyoming, Nebraska, then you drop down and you get to the southeast coast. And most of the time that's the best route to go. But in this time of year, I-80 gets shut down all the time. It gets some really bad storms. We'll often send a driver through Highway 6 down south and take a more southerly route to avoid storms. And this adds several miles and several $100s worth of expense onto the route. But we put safety ahead of that, and to avoid potential problems, specifically reduce the risks of accidents, we'll send people down on that southern route.
Okay. So you're trying to signal to your drivers then, when you say it comes from the top, you're signaling to them like, hey, look, I know that we want to be efficient. We want to maximize our profits, but not at the expense of your safety. So no, we're not going to make you take I-80. We're going to send you to Highway 6 or send you down to I-70 maybe and get you down into warmer climes before you start heading east. And a smart driver is going to understand, like you said, this is adding several $100, but they're doing this for me. It's taking me longer on the road, but I don't have to worry about road closures at best and accidents at worst.
And a lot of times drivers, for them personally, they appreciate that. And then another way that we kind of do that, and this comes up all the time in the winter, and I've had this happen several times over the last week even, where a driver will run into really bad weather, and rather than try to push it and potentially make the delivery on time, we just don't want to risk it. Okay, park for the day or for a few hours, or if you need to start driving a little bit later in the morning once the sun's up and things have warmed up a little bit and plows have had a chance to kind of go through, we constantly make that decision. And when drivers see that we're willing to put that safety in front of an on-time delivery, they really appreciate that. And we'll be the ones that deal with the repercussions, if there are any, from the broker. And usually, you can have a conversation with a shipper or broker, explain the situation, and most of the time they're okay with that. As long as there's a legit, storm moving through the area, they'll typically work with you.
Yeah. There's this making me think of the Air Force, which we love to poke fun of on this podcast, despite my being an Air Force baby. Okay. But you have pilots who take up an F-22, right? F-22, $350 million per aircraft, right?
Crazy.
It's just incredible. That was such an expensive program. Anyway, but what does the Air Force tell them? Your life is the first priority. That being said, don't ruin your aircraft without a really, really, really good reason, right? But we would rather you survive than we keep the $350 million aircraft, right? Anyway, that just got me thinking, would it be fair if you're, as a boss, talking to your employee drivers, would it be fair to say something like, number one, take care of yourself. Number two, take care of your equipment. Number three, take care of your load.
Yeah, absolutely.
And get back safe.
Yeah. And of course, all of that within reason.
Right.
Especially, we talk about on-time delivery. That's something that's incredibly important to us as a company. We want our loads, for the most part, to be delivered on time, and 98% of the time you can do that safely. and as long as a driver's done everything they can to get the load there safely and on time, and they run into some kind of weather bump, like, we're not going to hold that against them. And even if a broker or shipper does get upset, we want to make sure they feel safe and that they can get there safe. But our, kind of how we operate as a company is, especially in a situation where we think we're going to be running into, bad weather later on in a route, we'll try to get the driver to kind of, maybe we push a little bit hard the first day or two of the run, get as many miles in as we can. So we've got a little bit of wiggle room at the end. And if we need to stop, we can stop. And maybe, we need to stop longer and it's going to be late, then that's we've done everything we can. We've done our part. I don't ever feel bad going to a shipper or broker when I feel like we have done that and say, hey, this load is going to be late because of weather. We've done what we can to get it there on time. We can't control the weather.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well,
and one other point I kind of really want to make with this is the way that we treat it is, you often hear, like in a military term, the boots on the ground, the general or the commander that's on the ground and seeing things. And we treat our drivers that way. If our driver says, I do not feel comfortable driving this, we do not push them to drive.
Yeah. And you can create pressure even if you don't feel like you are.
Yeah.
Like if you go, are you sure? Are you sure the conditions are that bad? Like you're creating pressure on your driver, right? Yep. So is that what you're saying? You don't want them to feel like they have to drive through anything.
Right. We want them to feel like they've got the authority to make that decision. And we just ask that they keep us informed and they talk it through. And there's really only been in the time that I've owned the company, really one driver where I've felt like has kind of abused that, and I don't know that necessarily abused that is the right word.
Took advantage.
Didn't feel comfortable driving in stuff that I think you should really, as a commercial truck driver, feel comfortable driving in, right? Conditions can be bad or not, not horrible, but not perfect either. And that may just mean that, like, for example, the specific situation I'm thinking of is there was about, looking at weather maps and looking at everything, there's about 40 miles of bad weather. The truck was heading in a southerly direction and was going to get out of that in about 40 miles. And so if you have to drop your speed from, a 70 mile an hour freeway speed to 45 miles an hour for 40 miles, like, that's not going to kill you. Like, you can still operate safely. You're just driving, 25, 30 miles under the posted speed limit. That's okay. Like, that's one thing where I feel like, we can probably push it a little bit. You're still being safe. You're driving slower. If you had to drive 45 miles for 10 hours, that's a different situation. Like, we probably in that situation, let's park it. But if this is going to be for an hour or so, and then you get out of it, we might still push it as long as you can do so safely. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense to me. Okay, so we've talked about strategizing out on the road, but we should talk about before you get on the road at all, and talk about the equipment itself. So we talked about the drivers. Let's talk about maintenance, repairs, and taking care of your trucks and trailers so that because if you're not in safe equipment, you can't be safe out there, right, at least as a rule. Yeah.
And so that's another one of the things where you can show your drivers that you put, as the owner of the company, safety first, is, having good maintained vehicles. They could be older than old, but as long as they're maintained well, and you specifically those items that are a safety consideration, good functioning brakes, for example, you're not pushing the wear limits on the brakes, those kind of things, you're making those repairs. Drivers see that.
I can hear my grandpa's voice still. Hey, does it haul spuds? Yeah, get in. Okay, so what other specific issues do you want to talk about then when it comes to maintenance? How do these two issues tie together versus how we've talked about maintenance before?
So you're keeping good operating equipment so that it's safe. Good functioning brakes, good tires that you're not wearing the tires down till they're completely bald. You're just doing all those things that keep the truck operating safely. And, one of the things that you can do with that is, whether you as the owner operator, you as the company owner, or maybe you have somebody else that's mechanically inclined or a mechanic that is regularly looking over those vehicles. Like we tell our mechanics that we work with on a regular basis, when you do something, please give it essentially kind of the same thing you do in a DOT inspection, because that's really what DOT inspections focus on, are anything that could potentially be safety related. Go and look at those things and make sure everything's good. And if there's something that needs to be repaired, let's get it taken care of.
Would you encourage drivers to do that multiple times on a trip? Say you're at the loading dock, you're getting unloaded, and you've got a little bit of downtime. We've talked about exercise, we've talked about meals, we've talked about maintaining your spreadsheets, calling your sales contacts. Well, this is one more tool you can add to that belt, right? Of what do you do during your downtime where you're loading or unloading? That would be the perfect time to go, whack the tires, look under the hood, make sure everything's ship shape, right? You're
supposed to do a pre-trip inspection every day before you get in the truck. And, I would do that. And then, exactly what you're describing is also another thing I would do on every week or two. I do a little bit more thorough inspection when, I was at a shipper or receiver and not really doing anything.
Okay. All right. So we've talked about safety out on the road and, through dispatching. We talked about the truck itself, maintaining the truck. Let's talk about then company culture. If you're more than a one-man band, this is going to be something that you've got to consider. How are you disseminating this safety culture, right?
And I would argue that even if you are a one-man band, even if you are an owner-operator, this is something that you can still do. But basically have regular safety meetings or safety discussions, safety conversations. And I think you should do these at least once a month. And, it can be a bunch of different things. If you're a local hauler, it may be practical for you to do this, bring everybody in once a month and do an in-person meeting, or maybe you do it with different groups a few times throughout the month so that you get everybody covered. But regular safety meetings / safety discussions. If your fleet like ours is over the road, that's really impractical. And so there's a couple different ways that you can do that. And we'll talk a little bit about some more of those when we talk about some of the resources that are involved here. But there are remote options that you can kind of still manage that safety discussion. You basically just kind of pick a different topic each month of what you want to talk about. And one of the things that you can use to kind of help choose those topics is if you've had some kind of safety incident or multiple safety incidents, or are seeing a trend within your company, use that to determine, what you want to talk about. Like if, say, you've had a couple low speed accidents in parking lots over the last little, several months, then you kind of say, hey, maybe this month we're going to do some spatial awareness training and, get out and look, or, something along those lines.
Okay, good. All right. So this is potentially a really dumb question, but if it is, then you can just tell me it was dumb and I'll shut up. But can you be, instead of being reactive the way that you're talking about, as far as like, hey, we've seen this issue, or we've seen it multiple times, let's address it. Do you have contacts at, say, the DOT or your insurance company where you could go to them and say, hey, are there any trends you're seeing right now that we should be aware of, that, we can get out in front of before we run afoul of these things? Does anybody keep a database of what's going on with other companies that you can get them to share with you?
Yeah, your insurance company would be a good source for that. They keep statistics and data on all that kind of stuff all the time, and can give you, hey, here's kind of an order that I would, these are the most common items, first most common, second, third, fourth, so on and so forth. And you could build a program off of that. Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that's really important when you do that, when you do those trainings, make sure you record it, whether you use a spreadsheet or something else. Record when it happened. Make sure you've got record that shows that each and every driver participated in it in one form or another, and talk about the the topic and how long you spent discussing it.
Okay. And do you do everything company-wide, or, obviously you're going to give feedback if a driver is constantly presenting issues, right? But is there anything else that you want to do on an individual basis, or is most of this going to be like, hey, once a month or once a week, we need to...
If you have a driver that's involved in a specific incident, that's a really good situation that you, take that individual aside and so, okay, hey, we're going to talk a little bit about, what happened, how we can prevent it from happening again, and talk about some of those skills that they may need to think about more, work on more to prevent whatever it is that happened.
Okay, good. So through all this, as you said, you're keeping track of what you're doing, whether it's individual come to Jesus meetings or it's company-wide trainings. And then who's going to be asking for that? Anybody? Your insurance company maybe is checking to see if you're maintaining trainings around this?
So oftentimes the insurance company won't, they may ask, do you do it? Yes or no? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Typically FMCSA won't necessarily ask for it and unless you're involved in some kind of specific situation. But I think it's always a good idea that if you are doing these things and you do record them and you are checking those boxes, that you do a little bit of self-bragging, especially with your insurance agent. When it comes up time for your insurance renewal, give them that spreadsheet and show, hey, here are the trainings that we conducted. This is our program. The more you can show that you have a good safety culture within your company, the more comfortable the insurance underwriter who underwrites your policy is going to feel, and that will affect the pricing that you get. And so every insurance policy and underwriter has some wiggle room to adjust the policy according to the risk. And if they feel like you've got a good program with a good safety culture, they're going to figure that your risk is a little bit lower and it will be priced as such.
Very good.
So self-brag.
Self-brag. Oh,
Yeah.
What would you say? Talk yourself up.
Talk yourself up.
Yeah,
Yep.
Absolutely. Why not? That's one of my pet peeves in corporate culture, just personally. And yes, folks, trucking is very much a corporate culture. Is that you have to toot your own horn because ain't nobody else going to toot it for you.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. Market yourself a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. All right, Chris. So we've talked about the why. We've talked about the how. Anything else that we want to hit on the how of how to create this culture before I have one more why to get back to?
I want to talk a little bit about the resources.
Yeah.
So we can talk a little bit about that. So you're wanting to build this good safety culture. So what are some areas, or where can you look to kind of point you in the right direction and make sure you're building a good program? So we've already talked a little bit about insurance, but that's probably, your insurance company is probably one of your best resources for that. Most insurance companies that deal with trucking companies have a library of things, whether it's videos, literature, pamphlets, or anything that really shows different things like, good backing techniques or good defensive driving or spatial awareness or a myriad of other topics. Like some insurance companies have hundreds of topics that they've got resources for that you can talk about in your safety meeting. And it makes doing that really super easy. So that's always the first place I would look. Talk to your agent and they can probably show you what some of those resources are.
Okay. Where else would you go then?
So another good one, honestly, there's some stuff on YouTube that just people have put out that some of them are better than others. Some of them are pretty good, but they cover some of those same topics. So you can just, Google or look on YouTube and search for trucking safety or, defensive driving or anything like that. The FMCSA is another good resource. And I'm going to throw a few links in the show notes that, one's a resource for specific to drivers and one's a resource specific to trucking companies. And they've got a ton of stuff in each one of those links that you can look at that can help you build a good safety program.
My guess, and you tell me if I'm right, okay? If you go to your insurance company or the FMCSA, that would be even more so in this case. You go to them, they're going to give you a lot of the what the issues are and some of the how. Okay, and here's how you mitigate your risk around this. But some of the resources around that are going to be very like sanitized or lowest common denominator, kind of difficult to understand. They're trying to write for 1 million people instead of one person, right? So YouTube, as you say, it's going to be of varying quality, but my guess would be that would be a great resource for how, once you learn the what and the why, where instead of trying to read the directions on like the 3 different graphics explaining, okay, now you turn the wheel this way and now you back in this way, and the little pamphlets that can be hard to follow. YouTube is going to be a great resource for, here's a guy who's showing me exactly what to do. Yep. And exactly the procedure he follows in his truck inspections, and talking me through it. It's just, so maybe it's not as good a resource when it comes to the what and the why, but can be better for how. What do you think? Fair? Absolutely.
And one resource that we hope to have available sometime later this year is actually going to come through Haulin Assets Academy. Something that, will simplify this whole entire process, make it easier for a trucking company owner to, kind of conduct those safety meetings with their drivers, make sure their drivers are staying on top of things and are being educated, and constantly thinking about, how to be safe and what do I need to do to be safe, and just making sure that they're doing everything they can to operate your equipment safely.
All right. Well, Chris, can I move back into the why for just a brief moment? Let's bookend this a little bit, because as you've been talking about this, I've been thinking back on that why. And we talked about the moral obligation to yourself, your drivers, and other people out on the road, right? And that is extremely important. I'd say that's the most important part of this. But if that doesn't convince you, then there's the financial why as well. And as you've been talking through this, my brain has brought up memories of all sorts of things that we've discussed in past episodes. We've been doing this 5-6 years now, and so many of the things that we've talked about feed into this subject. And so if financial incentives are what's going to get you to do it, just think about it for a second. You're maintaining your trucks better. You're treating your drivers better. You're ensuring that loads get there. Even if occasionally you have to take a less than ideal route, or they're a few hours late, again, occasionally that's better than losing a trailer and a whole load during the 80-mile-an-hour winds on I-80 in Wyoming, yep. Right? And so over the long run, this is feeding into the profitability and long-term success of your company, even if it seems like a short-term bother or nuisance, right?
Yeah.
So, all right, Chris, any final thoughts before we say farewell?
Be safe. Just always be constantly thinking about that safety piece.
Yeah. Take care of yourself, take care of your equipment, take care of your load, and make yourself or your boss very, very happy.
There you go.
Right? All right.
That's all it is.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. Don't forget HaulinAssetsLLC.com, MotorCarrierHQ.com, and HaulinAssetsAcademy.com. Thanks again, everyone, and we will see you all next time for some financials.
See you soon.